So great reminder, thank you. Yeah, so there will be a video available afterwards. All right, so here we go. Let's dive in here. And again, feel free to pop in questions in the chat. I'll try to keep my eye on that. All right, so first of all, breathwork reflects life. There's a saying you'll hear when you get involved in breathwork for a period of time. How you do anything is how you do everything. There's a certain way in which, you know, you're not going to escape your problems on the mat. The same issues that are coming up are probably going to, in your day-to-day life, are going to show up on the mat. So the first thing I want to talk about is, if you're feeling stuck in breathwork, or there's something going on and you're feeling like you can't bust out of it, or ask yourself, have you ever had this experience before in your day-to-day life? Have you ever felt that way before? Is it bringing up emotions that are familiar to you? If they're familiar, you might think of the breathwork as this beautiful, safe, expansive container where you can dive in and work with the issues, places where you're feeling stuck and blocked. And I mean, there's no better place, in my experience, in my opinion, than on a breathwork pad when you feel safe and you've deliberately set aside some time for your own self-care, to take care of yourself and to do what you need to do, than in a breathwork setting. And so these issues that you carry around in your day-to-day life, take them onto the mat, work with them. If you feel if something comes up, the way passes through. So ask yourself, in what area of your life have you become comfortable? And you don't want to look too deeply. This is another thing that can happen. See this happen not infrequently, where somebody is at a crossroads in their life, but the decision they're faced with is too scary, and it's scary. It has big implications for the future, and so you kind of sometimes, I mean, if they're an immediate problem issue, you know, you're more likely to face it. But if it's a lingering thing and you're just kind of been going back and forth, those kind of things can bring up feelings of being stuck on the mat too. So where have you become comfortable? Where have you decided on some level of your being that you just don't want to go too deeply, because if you look too deeply, you might see something you don't want to deal with. If there's something you really have decided on your ego mind that you don't want to deal with in your life, it's going to affect your breath work. It always is the case. So be curious about it, dive into it, give full permission to the complete range of feelings around the issue. So yeah, by the way, I need to mention that if you're, because we are recording this, if you have your video on, you'll be part of that recording. So when we get to the end of the question and answer session, we'll turn the recording off. So I just want to give you a grounding in what I consider the two profound laws of breathwork, the things that guide everything that we do in this work. And so, shoot, what happened there? And the first one is trust. This is central, core. The three most important words you should always carry with you every time you're in a session, every minute. Always remember, trust the process. You have a deep inner guiding intelligence. We often call it, in neurodynamic, we call it the inner guiding intelligence, but there's so many words for it. Your intuitive self, your higher self. I like to use the word soul, but whatever it is, your inner healer is another one you hear a lot. Whatever it is, there's this deeper source of knowing and wisdom inside of you, but it doesn't come from the ego mind or the thinking mind. In fact, you can only access it when you get out of the thinking mind. That's the rub, and that's the challenge. So, so basically, there's a fantastic analogy. To me, it's the best analogy that I've ever come up with to describe this. I mean, I've been observing this for 28 years in my own process, and in my 18 years of facilitating. I just see this principle work over and over again. I really liken it to cutting your finger. If you cut your finger, you don't have to stop and think in your head, oh gosh, I'm bleeding. I need to get some white blood cells over there fast to seal that cut up. You know, just imagine if you had to add that to your day-to-day reality on top of everything else you're doing. But there's this below your conscious awareness, There's this profound inner wisdom which instinctively heals your physical body. It's beautiful. You don't have to do anything. Um, but, well, actually, yeah, but the same principle applies in breath work to the psychological system and the emotional system and the spiritual system, if you will, and even to the physical system too. Breathwork will help your physical body realign. So the challenge is you have to trust that, because it doesn't happen from the thinking mind. It happens when you're getting out, when you get out of the thinking mind. That's the sort of the rub, the challenge that we're all facing, is that dance between the ego mind and the higher self. But I studied and trained with Dr. Stanislav Grof, who's been studying the interface of healing with these what he calls non-ordinary states of consciousness. When you do a breath work, you're going into a non-ordinary state. There's a much deeper capacity to access healing when you get out of your day-to-day state and into this non-ordinary state. And I mean, he's been observing this for 60 years. I've been observing for 28. It really, truly works. But the essence of it, though, is you have to let go of all your expectations and surrender to the process. So it's just like plants that lean towards the sun. I think this is another beautiful analogy. When plants don't have enough light for photosynthesis, they're going to lean towards the sun. Your soul, your inner guidance, is going to lean you towards your sun if you just allow. Get out of your head and follow it wherever the session takes you. All true power transformation comes within. Okay, so breathwork law 2, the second most important principle in breathwork is surrender. If you can get to the point of trusting your inner guidance, can you allow yourself to surrender to wherever it takes you? It really is two sides of a coin. First, you have to trust that you're going to be okay if you let go. But then you have to let go, and that's the surrender part. I like to call breathwork, my pet name is Surrender Gym. You're building, you think it's breathwork, but it's really a gym. You're going to build your muscles of trust and surrender. You're learning how to get out of that head and just surrender to whatever it takes you. It's a challenge. You know, we spend our whole lives feeling a need to be, we're trying to make our lives happen. There's a very directive quality in day-to-day life, but breathwork is about letting go of that directiveness and all your thoughts about what you want to have happen. So I like the image that I had a Jungian professor once who said that in breathwork, well, actually in all people, think of it, there's a weave between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. And basically, when we part that weave, what we're doing in breathwork is parting that weave to access the unconscious mind. And, after watching this process of breathwork for all these years, my subjective impression is that there's about 25 to 30% of people that just instinctively have a permeable weave. It's lubricated, it came pre-lubed, or else they're wired in a different way. They just instinctively can drop out of their head and go into like a dream world process, dream states. And oftentimes it's people that have a real ease with dreams, but not always. The rest of us have to do some degree of dance to learn how to get out of the mind. So again, it's the surrender gym practice. Let's see here. Let me just check the questions here. Oh, there's already a bunch. Yeah, Michael, I'll talk about that at the end. Yes, there will be a recording, Trevor. I'm not sure what ATM means on Anjali or Trevor. Yeah, okay, we got that already. You're welcome, Sarah. Yes, exactly. Procrastination, scary change. That's a surefire. If you're procrastinating that, you're probably going to be procrastinating going deeper in your breath work. Johnny, I find it hard to breathe deeply. Feels like I'm not able to get my breath deep enough into my stomach. Also, when trying this, it makes me cough. So that's a personal question. I'm going to answer those in the second half after the presentation. So we'll come back to that, Johnny. Good question. And then great, Sarah's got a response for you already at the moment. Yes. Okay, so moving forward here, letting go of expectations. Shakespeare said expectation is the root of all heartache, and honestly, it's so true in breathwork. There's so much breathwork heartache happens because we're expecting something to happen or wanting something to happen. This is kind of trust part 2. You must let go of all expectations. Whenever you're holding any expectations of what you want to have happen, even the most subtle things, in fact, those are the most insidious at times, because we think we're not expecting something, but underneath it all, yeah, we're kind of expecting we're going to feel we're going to feel, at least we feel like we're going to feel better after the session, right? Or, and honestly, if you surrender, you will feel better. But, but if you, it's just, there's often the really subtle expectations. You got to work to let go of those. Whenever you're having any expectations, you're not in the optimal inner guidance flow. That's the inner guidance. The inner healer works most efficiently. The more you get out of the head, the more efficient it works. The faster catharsis and release and healing happens. So, same thing. Judgments too. I mean, it's just the other side of expectations. When you're in the session and you're judging what's going on, oh, this sucks. I wanted a mystical experience. Here I am, like, just stuck in some yogic trance state, which, by the way, there's a whole load of people in the world that would pay a lot of money to get into some of the yogic trance states. But, those judgments that are like the monkey mind, just like, oh, I thought something better was going to happen, or, oh, I could have gotten more done if I'd stayed at my desk today. Anyways, all those thoughts and judgments, that's what you're learning to release. That's surrender, Jim. It's the practice of letting go, trusting. And then this is a nice phrase to remember: let yourself be surprised. When you're in the surprise state, that's when you're most likely to be really in the inner guidance state. Okay, next. Just a few words on intention. If you must, keep any intentions you hold as general as possible. So basically, if you have an intention, you're wanting to heal something, okay, fine, but just try to make it as general as possible. And then what I like to do, if I really have some driving need that my mind won't let me go into the session, is I close my eyes before the session, I imagine a balloon, a healing balloon. I place the intention in the balloon and then I let it go. It's the let go, let God phrase that you might have heard if you worked in 12 steps or anything. Let it go, and then you go do the breathwork session and just trust that the spirit of the universe will bring it to you if it's the right moment, or maybe it'll come another time. So, and then this is just something I'm going to share. To me, the word namaste captures the spirit that you want to go into breathwork in. I have a little prayer that I say to myself. I've said it before, every single workshop I've ever facilitated. It reminds me what I'm doing and why I'm there. And essentially, it's, may this breathwork session serve my highest good and the highest good of everyone here. That really just puts me in the right mind space, to really just let go and trust. So that's a nice one to remember. Okay, so next, your job as a breather. I don't know if this is a good picture, but I thought it was kind of cute. You got to bring your lunch pail. You got to think of this. You have a job description. And here's the job description. Your job description is let yourself be surprised. Your next second job description is to allow whatever you're experiencing to be as big as it wants to be. And that is because of the next statement: the only way past is through. And this applies to everything. If you resist it, it's going to persist, including states that we're judging, including feeling stuck, including feeling sleepy. Wherever you are, that's ultimately the fastest path to healing is to surrender to that. I like to say, if you're feeling irritable or okay, let me just tell you a story from, because I have a strong thinking mind. I've always had a hard time. It doesn't come easy. I have to work. I have to go to surrender gym, and I've had many breathwork I'm talking about in-person sessions where I was breathing in a group of 20 people or 30 or 40 or whatever it was, sometimes hundreds when Stan Groff was facilitating. And in that moment, I start to do the breathing and the music starts. And in-person workshops, we play the music at almost concert level volume. It's so powerful, you can feel the bass shaking the floor. It adds another dimension. And I'm feeling the bass, and I'm starting to do the breathing, and I'm starting to get into it. The 10 minutes pass, 15, and I'm still doing the breathing. And then like 15 minutes pass, and I'm like, oh, dang it, I'm having a hard time getting out of my head. And then I start suddenly hearing somebody to my right, just screaming, an earth-curdling scream. Then I suddenly hear somebody to my left, just raging into some pillows or kicking some pillows that are pressed against the wall and just, shaking their whole body. I mean, I'm imagining that's what's happening. I can't see because I'm wearing my blindfold. But so in that moment, I have a story that I tell myself that comes up in, kind of an embedded story, not a conscious story, a story that says, oh, this freaking sucks. Here I am lying on this damn mat. I paid $175 to do this workshop, and everybody else is having these great experiences. And there I am, like stuck in my head. And you have no idea how many times that story has come up in my breathwork journey. But what I've learned is that when it comes up is to stop and say, you know what's going on underneath all that, beneath that story? And more times than not, I find that I'm actually really frustrated. Like, God damn it, everybody else, I never get what everybody else gets. And there's this story there, and I start diving into the story and the feelings behind that story, and I'm frustrated as heck. It's one of the things that helped me connect to my anger. And I'm going to talk more about anger in a little while, but because I think suppressed anger is another thing that can really block us. You got to own your anger in breathwork, but we'll come back around to that. But when I actually surrender to the frustration, like I'll tell you this, whenever I do a breathwork session, I always have two large, giant floor pillows, one on each side of me when I'm lying down, so that if frustration comes up or anger, that I instinctually feel safe, and I just start pounding and vocalizing and raging and like, and I just let this deep, whatever it is, I surrender to that. And usually that is when my breathwork session begins. That's when I drop in. I could have spent another hour hanging out in my head thinking about what was sucky about that situation. But my job in that moment is to go below that. What's really happening in your body, in your emotional self. So that's one thing that helps a lot of people a lot of the time. Tune in deeper. The body's a really powerful gateway into the session. It really holds so much, including emotion. So, and this applies to anything, judgments about whatever, like, oh, here I am in another yogic sleep state. This sucks, or whatever might be coming up. Your job is to accept the full catastrophe. It's a quote from, I think, the movie Zorba the Greek. Your job in breathwork is to accept the full catastrophe of our humanity, everything, the full range of joy and pain. Painful experiences, nobody wants painful experiences, but try to remember when you go into a breathwork session that the healing is optimized when you're in the non-ordinary state. You really get so much more for your money when you release emotion or energy in a breathwork session compared to your day-to-day self. So the more you can just embrace the whole thing, the good and the bad, the better you're going to be, the deeper you're going to go, the faster and more efficient your inner healer is going to guide you. So as I like to say, be the best damn stuck you can possibly be if you're feeling stuck. Be the best staying angry or irritable or frustrated. So moving on. So NDB, in to me, any breathwork worth its salt is a yin process, not a yang. I mean, I'm sure, no, I take that back. I'm sure that there's some quality breathwork practices that have more intentional yang type energy to them. But the breathworks that have always had the most meaning for me and to me have been very powerful have been those that really are teaching me to go to the yin side of life. That it's the receptive, it's the open-hearted. I'm not going into the session trying to change everything, trying to change it. Or, okay, this is a common thing that we see happen a lot, especially I think with the Wim Hof method out there. Many people will come in like, yeah, I've heard this is a great breath work. I'm so gonna kill this, man. I'm gonna breathe so hard and so deep. I'm just gonna will myself into a mystical unitive experience, and it just doesn't work that way. It's like, it's the exact opposite of what you need to do, which is, and that person often will breathe extremely deep and extremely fast and just really try to force things. And it will bring up a lot of stuff. It often brings up tetany, but it's the more you can let go, allow, be receptive, embrace, loving whatever is, that's where you want to go. That's the direction for the fastest path to healing. So, a confession. After 28 years of breathwork, I still have a strong, to this day, I don't have breakthrough sessions all the time. I might have one every 4, 5, 6 on average. The rest of the time, I'm going to surrender gym. I'm bringing my lunch pail. I'm practicing. It's like meditation. Yogis tell us it's a lifelong journey to let go of the thinking mind. And so you're not alone if you're feeling like you're in a plateau. There's always plateaus. In fact, I take the Taoist approach or perspective as well, which is, in all honesty, it's not even possible to have breakthroughs if you don't love stuck. Stuck and breakthrough are two sides of the same coin, and one doesn't exist without the other. So love your stuckness, love your plateaus, love the process, and don't get too attached to the journey. Whatever else happens, this is what I remind myself. I always get these benefits, no matter what else is going on. So I'm building my muscles, right? So that's always a good thing. Hopefully, over time, that has a benefit, and it does. I might get intuitive insights. A lot of times, just doing the breathing and slowing down for an hour, I'll get some insights into my life that I can take with me after the session. As long as I'm surrendering whatever comes up, I almost always feel really deeply relaxed by the end of the slower, relaxing, meditative music at the end. I feel like I get an energetic reset. Like if there's, the chi, if Chinese medicine concept of chi, I feel like my chi just resets, and I just feel like completely in a better space after doing an hour of breath work. I mean, these are great benefits. I feel more emotionally grounded. And then there's this other thing. Actually, breathing doesn't oxygenate; it deoxygenates. I need to change that. But it does catalyze an alkalizing effect on your physical body, and we know that the more your body alkalizes, the more it creates a state of anti-inflammation, which is good for everything. Inflammation is the source of so many ailments and issues in modern society. So those, no matter what, at least you get those. So the IGI always strives to bring you harmony, equilibrium, homeostasis, and balance. This is a little more complex, but it's trying to bring you back to your highest state of balance with your higher self, with your soul, with your deepest, true, authentic self. And this works on many different levels. On the most mundane, it could be the most mundane level. You haven't had enough sleep this week. You've been working on a project, and for 4 days in a row, you got 3 hours less sleep than you normally do. and you come to a breathwork session. Well, what does your body need in that moment? It needs rest. So the IGI is going to bring you sleep or yogic sleep state. There's a beauty to that, and we fight that so often. But sometimes just letting ourselves be sleep, we might say, is a really good thing to just allow. So another thing is, if let's just say you're sitting in a chair, working in front of a computer too long, and you get a sort of a pain in your lower back. The breath, the inner guidance it's very possibly gonna kind of show you that pain. And I know, okay, so in my breathwork experience, I almost feel that I have to go through a physical barrier oftentimes before I get to some deeper experiences. It's almost like my inner healer, inner guidance, the first thing it does is say, okay, we got to whip you into shape if we're going to take you to some deeper states. And, first of all, if I'm sleepy, it might bring me there. But if I'm not sleepy, but I've got tensions in my body, literally what I've found is those parts of the body, it's almost like there's this intelligence that wakes up. And I mean, I know this didn't happen for me in the first few years I did breathwork. It took me a while to access this place of just of surrendering to the body and letting it move however it wants to. My body will start to move. It's like the places that are stuck, it's almost like the system is saying, we need to get chi flow back in here. We got to really get blood flow back in the muscles. And it's like right now, I actually feel a bit of a kink in my shoulder. And if I just kind of put myself in a breathwork mode and just surrender to it, it starts moving, and it's painful because the part of me that's got a little tension is stuck. But when I just surrender, the body will move, will bring energy back and try to get the flow back. I experienced that over and over the years, and a lot of times the first period of the session for me is about just letting the body reset itself. So that's another very mundane, on one level it's very mundane, on another level it's very powerful, that the inner healer, the inner guidance is trying to bring you back into that equilibrium, balance, homeostasis state. Oops. Another way I believe that it works is, let's just say you do have a strong thinking mind and you're spending a lot of time, you spend a lot of time in a job where you make a lot of decisions and have to do a lot of writing or whatever it might be. And so you don't really give yourself enough breaks from that. You kind of spend a lot of time in your head. Honestly, I have a theory that people that have stronger thinking minds are more likely to have the yoga nidra experience, the yogic trance states. It's almost, you can almost think of yogic trance states as the antidote to an overthinking mind. It's a break from the mind. I mean, at some level, isn't that? I think it's pretty amazing. And yoga nidra, that's actually a state. There's actually people that run workshops to help people access yoga nidra. And it's a state that we see quite commonly in breathwork sessions. It's considered a very deep and powerful restorative state in yogic traditions. It's like you feel like you're sleeping, but you're not. There's still an awareness there that is not there when you go to bed and you go to sleep. But it's like, I've heard some people describe it as like going to the void. There's nothingness there. It's like it's a complete break from the ego mind. You're not there anymore. You're just present. You're there. There's a presence, but your identity, your ego self, isn't there. Anyway, so if that happens, just love it, embrace it, and let it work with you. So these are different ways that the IGI might work. I just made this little comment, but I actually sometimes feel like when I let my body move itself and be free, it's almost like I feel like those muscles are just like breathing this ginormous sigh of relief. Like, oh, thank you for finally letting us do what we need to do instead of just being forced into those stupid positions in your chair all the time, or this or that. So It also can work on the emotional level. Um, we see this so often over in time when people are holding in emotions. There's something of their vital energy is being stifled. Um, a little bit of catharsis, emotional catharsis, and breath work. People, I can't tell you how many times over the years I've had somebody come back to me the following week after a session and say, "Oh my God, I just really let myself feel some of that unfinished grief around the loss of my fill in the blank somebody, and I just feel like lighter this week, and I have more energy." That's a really common thing I've heard. Um, Breathwork will open those emotional places up if you can open your heart to allow that. And this is the whole idea, the trust. If you can get out of your head and get out of all those expectations and let go of all those judgments, just like that finger cutting itself, you cut yourself, you don't have to think about it. Your system will take over and move you towards your sun. This is kind of all, these are all examples of what I started out in the beginning and trying to talk about. So it also works on more subtle levels, you know, and again, I'm envious of the people that get more of the dreamlike journey visions and all that. I do get them, but maybe every 4, 5, or 6 or 7 sessions, or not even that much sometimes. Like it really can be a powerful modality to help you access spirit realms and visionary experiences and like dreamlike sequences, and um, those will come if you do it over time, if you haven't experienced them yet. um, Stan Groff, I'm going to share this. Groff has written one of the coolest things I think he's ever written about, and he's written almost 30 books. You'll find this in a few of his books, but he's mapped out the full, basically got a map of consciousness from his tens of thousands of observational sessions of non-order state work. And essentially he says that there's 4 different categories of experience that you can go into. The first is simply the sensory barrier. That is like the body energy and just sensory experiences, smells and sounds and bodily sensations. But then you get into 3 important, like not like 3 other more content related ones. The first one is the personal unconscious. Anything that has happened to you from the moment of your birth up until the present day could come up in a breathwork session. And there's a whole huge slew of things that, like in that iceberg picture in the beginning, you never know what could come up from your personal life history. The third area you might experience something is called the perinatal, and he more than any other, he's one of the biggest proponents of this concept that the birth process leaves a much deeper pre-verbal bodily memory in us that has a much stronger impact on our day-to-day reality than, for most people, than modern Western psychology believes or conceives. And he's written a lot about that. And again, the thing I appreciate about his work is that he's a psychiatrist, and everything that he's written about and talks about and shares is based on clinical observation. So he didn't just kind of make this up. He's kind of put it together from watching all everybody's experiences. And I can't go into it right now, but there's 4 stages of the birth process, and if depending upon which stage you had prominent in your birth process, that could leave sort of a filter through which you experience the world. It's very fascinating. And then the 4th category, so the first 3 are the sensory realm, the personal unconscious, the perinatal. Oh, and by the way, the perinatal, he has found that experiences of birth are frequently intertwined or followed often or intertwined with experiences of death and rebirth moments. And then lastly, the transpersonal realm, which is the realm that everybody wants to experience. It's like transcendent experiences that, as Alan Watts said, transcend the skin encapsulated ego self that we think of as who we are, things that modern science is really a little bit uncomfortable with. It could be out of body experiences, it could be psychic experiences, it could be experiences of mythological entities or all kinds of sort of archetypal realm experiences, um, as well as the whole mystical and void experiences. Like, so that's the fourth level. And so the IGI can bring things on any four of those levels. And I kind of told this story. I had a person in a workshop. Well, I did a breathe group at some point where we had 8 participants, and we got together every week for 8 weeks. And most people in that group had very powerful experiences, but there was one woman who was very close friends with a bunch of them they were in the group, and she never could drop in. She just kept saying, I didn't drop in the way everybody else does. But she kept coming, and she said she loved it still because in the breath work, she found that she was getting insights into her life. Like the things that she wasn't clear about, she would gain insight to them in her breathwork session. And that meant so much to her. So sometimes breathwork brings insights through the intuitive mind. And I found that I realized I had to break out of my own story because I'd been too caught up. There's such a judgment on a lot of spiritual circles about you got to get out of the monkey mind, which I think is all true, but it reminded me that there's not just a lower mind, there's also a higher mind that can come through in breathwork at times, but only when you're not looking for it. So don't try to access it. Okay, so here's a few other factors which can inhibit your capacity to go deeper. Fear of change. When I first started doing breathwork in this farm south of Chicago in 1992, mainly, I don't know where this came from, but everybody seemed to say to everybody else all the time, "You want change? Keep breathing." You know, breathwork will catalyze change. It just does. If you're doing it with an open heart, it's going to bring stuff up. It's going to force you to face things and confront things. But change is inconvenient. It's disruptive, and it's disruptive not just for you, but for your loved ones. So, do you really and truly want change? That's an important question to ask. Second thing, fear of anger. I think I'm using the word pandemic a little loosely here, but a pandemic of suppressed anger in modern society. So I personally was afraid of anger for the first 30 years of my life. I would bypass anger and go to compassion all the time. Literally, somebody would cut me off, and my Italian side would want to give them the finger or something. It was really irritating. But then my other side would come in like, they probably got up on the wrong side of the bed today, and they probably had a disruptive childhood, and I just need to give them a break. And so I'd let go of whatever anger, and I just opened my heart to compassion. And so I just never got angry. It wasn't until I started really getting into breath work that I learned that I really had a lot of anger inside of me. And that's one of the benefits of doing in-person breath work is when other people are going into these states around you, it can really help mobilize your own inner experiences. It reminds you that, oh, maybe I've got anger in me. It helps you, like you can relate. You never know what you're going to relate to in a group setting, what might be triggered or catalyzed in you. And there's a beauty in that. So that's another thing I should add aside to this. I really recommend that if you have never done it, when we are allowed and breathwork comes back to in-person sessions, I definitely encourage you to try an in-person session. I mean, I would recommend mostly in holotropic breath work, if you can't get to LA and do one of Michael's workshops. I actually have a nonprofit in Seattle too that does live workshops, but of course everybody's on hold. So I just was blown away at how much anger was in me. And I mean, I've had a lot of sessions where I've had to rage. And that's the other thing. If you're dealing with anger, it can be a little bit harder. You can only go so far by yourself. At a certain point, and I really have come to believe that there's so much suppressed anger. We just don't have good role models for how to access and express our anger. And when you start to get into it, if you go deeper into it, you like, okay, I'll confess to you again, in my home, back in the Seattle area, I have a breathwork room, In that breathwork room, it's a small bedroom, but it's nothing but pillows and a giant 5-inch thick, high density foam, twin bed sized pad with giant pillows all around. And that space lets me totally go into the anger in ways when it comes up. I'm not saying it comes up all the time, but when it comes up, if you suppress the anger, you're going to probably suppress the session. So open your heart to anger and try to. Breathwork is a safe space to do it. Now, when you go to an in-person workshop, sometimes when you get to some deep rage, it can take literally. There's a method where 2 facilitators can hold down one person completely safe. It's almost like having a straitjacket on, and let them completely dive into it. That is a powerful thing if you ever get the opportunity to do that, if you have anger issues, which you may very well, more than you might realize. But I lost my train there. But basically, open your heart to anger. Third thing, fear of grief. I mean, I know many people have told me, I'm afraid that if I dive into my grief, it's going to overwhelm me and I'll drown in it. You know, if these are issues, sometimes it can be helpful to bring in a therapist to work with somebody on these issues simultaneously to doing the breath work. There's nothing better than a therapist who understand breath work. There's not enough of them out there, but there are some. Lastly, this is really important. Do you feel physically safe? I kind of said, you know, if you're holding suppressed anger, your IGI might not bring it up if you don't have a pillow to pound. If you're on your bed, if you really surrender, you might fall off your bed if you access some of these deeper places. Will you hit your head if you're lying on a pad and you're right near your dresser? You know, put one of those pillows between your head and your dresser if this stuff comes up. You also can bring in you can ask somebody to come in and be sit for you during the session too. We've had a bunch of comments and requests on that topic. So sometime in the next month or two, I'll just say for sure, we'll do another one of these webinars that talks about how to work with a partner, a sitter, to help you support you to go deeper in your process. So I guess I got a few things I can say. A sitter is somebody who just is there to support you. There's 2 levels to this. On one level, it is simply they're there to be a sacred witness. That alone can be powerful. To let yourself be seen in your most vulnerable states of experience. But they also, secondarily, they can provide on-the-spot support potentially. Let's say you've been doing breath work and you're realizing anger is coming up. You know, having somebody without a blindfold on who can see if you're getting too close to the dresser could be really helpful. They could take that pillow and make sure. Sitters can kind of set a boundary, like put the pillow between you and the dresser, so that if you start to feel the pillow, you know you got to stop going that direction. So there's 2 situations where it's most profoundly beneficial to have a sitter. And one of them is if you're dealing with childhood trauma or intense PTSD trauma. Stan Grof talks about there being 2 types of trauma. Trauma of commission, which is when things happen to us which shouldn't have happened. Things like abuse, whether it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. That sucks. But the one thing it has going for it is you have a memory. You have something in you that you can push against and fight against and experience. The second trauma may almost be a little more insidious. It's called trauma of omission. And trauma of omission is when you didn't get what you needed for full, healthy emotional development as a child. If your parents weren't affectionate, let's just say, or threw lots of judgments on you and kind of forced you to be somebody that wasn't aligned with your inner truth, your inner authentic self. So if you have trauma of omission, if you go to a state of omission, it's hard to heal those states because you don't know what you're missing. But if you identify that you go to a place, when people go to states of trauma of omission, they often, their body language in breath work, they might just curl up like an infant that's all alone in the world, or they turn away from other people. There's a real, they're not thinking about it. It's your body just instinctually does that. If you notice that those types of things come up in the breath work, it can be really valuable to invite somebody to come and sit with you during the session, so that, and their job would just be, if it comes up, they can reach out and just put a hand on your shoulder, or you could reach out your hand and know that somebody's there to hold your hand. We'll talk more about that when we do more depth, go in more depth about this. But the second condition where working with a sitter can be really valuable is if you're really struggling with the breathing. Now, I associate this from my background and experience with Grof's birth process, like that if there's certain states, if you went through an intense traumatic birth, especially if you're having a hard time breathing in the womb or the umbilical cord. Okay, so I tend to be a skeptic, and I don't totally believe something until I experience it myself. And so I thought initially that Grof's model of the birth stuff was really cool, but I hadn't experienced it. So, but then like about 6 years into my breath work, I was at a retreat, and for the first time ever, I started going when I would breathe. At some point, I'd reach a point where suddenly my arm would come up like this, and thrust my chin up, and I literally, the more I would breathe, the more faster I'd get to this place where I couldn't breathe. So how do you work with a place, if my job is to surrender and trust, how do you work with a state of, not be able to breathe? Well, whenever I get to that place, eventually it would end in just a huge coughing fit, and I'd be like spitting up all kinds of stuff. And it went on for the whole week. I did 2-3 hour sessions, and I mean, I had a lot of support there, which I'm really grateful for. It encouraged me to keep going back into it. And I do feel like something cleared. And I actually, that was one of the times where I felt like I had physical evidence that something cleared in my body, because I mean, I literally, it was in the desert. This was down in the Palm Springs area in California. And I came in with just completely dry sinuses. After that first breathwork session, I just started draining intensely sinus-wise for the whole next week. It came out of nowhere. I was really blown. It really kind of taught me something about how the body holds stuff. So that was powerful. And then later, I called my mother and I said, "Hey, did something happen like in my birth process?" And she confirmed for me that there was an umbilical cord wrapped around my neck. So if people that have those types of experiences sometimes can have a hard time staying with the breathing. I mean, who wants to breathe if you leave to not be able to breathe, or just difficult birth situations? That's where it can be really helpful to have a sitter. Sometimes just somebody to put their hand on your shoulder the second you stop breathing. Like when people are that extreme, they really need somebody to just constantly remind them, to hover over them and instantly remind them to stay with the breathing, and to go into whatever comes up. So, and again, if you ever invite a sitter in, you got to make it absolutely clear that this is not about them. Whatever comes up for them, they have to put it aside until your session's over. They're there to do nothing but witness and support. This might be one of the hardest things we have to do in modern Western cultures. What do we do the first time somebody starts to cry? We instantly grab a tissue and say, "Here, this is not about that. It's about just being present and allowing." Distinguishing the forest from the trees in breathwork. So the longer you've held a behavioral pattern in yourself, the longer it's going to take to break out of that pattern. This is just common sense on some level, but I think it's important just to reflect on this a little bit. As we go through life, and every year that goes by, I think the neuronal pathways in our brain for the familiar and the comfort, those pathways become larger and more lubricated. Like I've heard some neurologists describe it almost like, little paths, neuronal pathways. When you go follow the same one over and over again, they become super highways in the brain. Like it's so much more easy to hop on the highway, right? But like is that whole Frost poem, to take, which path do you want to take, the road traveled or the road less traveled? But it's really hard to forge new pathways when you've been carrying a pattern for a long time. So be gentle with yourself and give yourself permission to say, you know what, it might not happen overnight. The more lubricated the mental pattern, the longer it might be to break out and create new habits. So I'm going to tell a couple. I think I'm going to mostly close this session by telling a few stories. So there's a woman who came to one of my breathworks 10 years ago who was a computer programmer in her 50s, and she was very much in her head, just struggled to get into her body and her emotional self. And she also, though, simultaneously was aware that she had been through some sort of abuse from childhood. She didn't know what it was, but she felt it viscerally at times. And she'd been to therapy she tried therapy 3 times, and she just couldn't get out of her head and get into the experiences of it. So she read about breathwork. She came to the session with a lot of hopefulness, like, oh, I think this might be what will finally help me. She almost walked to the door initially because we were all sitting in a circle and pillows on the floor, and she was a little freaked out by that, but she stuck through it. She worked through that. And she went in the morning session, and our sessions in person workshops were 3 hours long, and she dived in, and she just went through hell in those 3 hours. Like it was just darkness and anger, but most of it, that first thing, I think, was more like just grief and sobbing, and she just looked like she was in pain the whole time. And so when she came out of it, she was actually looked a lot more relaxed and almost was glowing in a certain way, having been through that painful journey. And she said, you know what, that was one of the most difficult things I've ever gone through, but I actually feel a little bit lighter, and this gives me hope that I might be able to break through this at some point. So she really became sold that this could help her, and she started coming to every one of our workshops, and we were doing one workshop every month at that point. And so she came every month for a year. She came every month for another 6 months. Finally, on the year and a half point, in that session, it was all darkness, but somewhere in the middle, she had her first moment of experiencing a joyful moment in breathwork. And it's one of the more memorable things I'll ever remember in my breathwork. Like she just suddenly, her face changed. She just started laughing uncontrollably, like, and in this sobbing tears of joy. Like she separated from her trauma for the first time and could see it from outside of it. And it was just beautiful. But then 15 minutes later, 10 minutes, she went back into pain and darkness again. And it wasn't until the 2-year point, that was when she first had a session that was more joy than pain. And it was just, remarkable to witness that journey of hers for 2 years. So I think it's valuable for you all to hear that story, just to remember that there's some deep things that happen. The deeper the issues you're bringing in, the longer it takes sometimes. You got to step back and remember, if you've done 5 breathwork sessions, maybe where are you going to be when you've done 50? I mean, I'm not trying to just sell you on breathwork, and I'm not saying it's for everybody, but when you make a commitment to incorporate breathwork as part of your work, it's not like your one and only spiritual path, but it's a really fantastic adjunct. I know another guy. His wife was a facilitator in the early 90s, and when I met him, he was a facilitator too. And he told me his story that he was in his early 40s or mid 40s at the time, and he said that he had never cried in his adult life, and the last memory he had of ever crying was when he was about 4 years old. And so when his wife started getting into breath work and became a facilitator, he really wanted to support her. And he was also, he said he was a little bit nervous that she would grow and leave him behind in some way. So he started going to every one of the workshops. And he said he kept thinking, one of these days I'm going to have an emotional breakthrough, and I'm going to just start sobbing, and I'm going to release this pain of a lifetime. But it never happened. It didn't, like 10 sessions, 20 sessions. It wasn't until his 24th session, is what he told me, that suddenly, like near the end of the session with 10 minutes to go during the heartful music, he suddenly just, a gateway opened. He started sobbing, and he didn't stop for 2 hours or longer. And he said it was like his heart. Everybody back then would, well, I mean, there's many people who would call it his heart chakra opened. Who knows, whatever you want to call it, but he opened up in some way, and that it changed a lot of stuff for him. So, I'm not saying it's going to take 24 sessions to have a breakthrough moment like that, but I'm just saying keep your heart open to the process and the timing of it all. So one other story here. When I went through the Groff training, it was a 9-week residential training. It's the most comprehensive breathwork training in the world. It takes 2 years, and you have to be in residence for 9 weeks of those 2 years. My favorite moment in the entire training was in the final certification, which was a 2-week certification process. And so in Groff breathwork, you do artwork after your breathwork session. It's basically, we call it mandala drawing. You draw on a sheet of paper with a circle in it, and it's not meant to be like you're drawing something pretty. It's just meant to express what happened in the session. And a lot of times it's all about getting out of your head, and same approach to breathwork, to mandala, is that you do to breathwork. Let yourself be surprised. In fact, when I do mandalas, I always do them with my opposite hand, my left hand, because I let go more and relax, and I actually find I like them more visually. But anyway, some people, you do that before you start thinking too much, before you get back into your head. And then, some people then will write on the back of the mandala what happened verbally after they're done, because it's easy to forget what happens in your breathwork sessions. And then if you ever decide to do something like this, always put a date on it, because you to keep track of it. Okay, so fast forward to my certification. We were all told that we had to bring our lifelong set of mandalas from our whole breathwork journey, that we all were going to be going in front of the group and sharing our whole story. So it really blew me away. I was really amazed. Somebody would go up and in the middle of the circle, put down chronologically all their mandalas, and then tell their story. And it really expanded my mind into my understanding of how the inner healer works, how breath work. Like you'd see somebody had been doing breathwork for 10 years, and like the first 3 years, they always used the same 3 colors in their mandalas. And then suddenly a new color starts to emerge at the 3-year point. And then a year later, that color is the predominant color. Or you might see a theme come up of like an animal, a bear, and then over time, and the person may or may not have any idea what that bear was about in that moment. They're just like, I don't know, whatever. But then a year, 5 years, the bear becomes a motif that shows up in almost a large number of breathwork sessions after that. You could really see the intelligence over time of the inner guiding intelligence, the IGI, the inner healer, your intuitive self. So it just blew me away, and it really helped me kind of step back and see the forest from the trees. One last story. I've come to believe that this is sort of a last recommendation, that there is a place for the will in breathwork. The will meaning just a super strong intention. But let me explain this from what I experienced once. I was coming out of a 10-year relationship at one point in my breathwork journey, and I was really kind of it was in a grievy sort of space, a lot of emotion coming up, and some really sweet friend of mine put together a surprise birthday party for me at this one point, including inviting some people from out of town. And one of them was actually Michael. I'll share that. And we had this weekend together with some bunch of people, and then everybody left except for two friends, Michael and another dear friend of mine. And in that day, it was a Sunday. Those two friends came to me and said, "You know what, Glenn, you really could use a breathwork session." And I was like, I know you're absolutely right. I've got a lot of stuff coming up. And so, well, they offered to sit for me for a breathwork session, which I was really, touched and moved by that offer. And I was like, and I kind of knew instantly I can't refuse this, even though I didn't really want to do a breathwork session that night after a weekend of socializing. Like, I really need to do this. So, but my second friend, my other friend who knew me really, really well, she said, but I'm going to do this under one condition. And she said, the condition is you have to commit to me that no matter what comes up, you're not going to get distracted by your trickster mind. Whatever, you're not going to be distracted. You're going to go as deep as you possibly can. And so that really set me back. I was like, whoa, can I do that? That's against the principles of breathwork, isn't it? I can't say I'm going to do, I have to follow the process. But I thought about it a little more, and it kind of reminded me of this retreat I'd been to once upon a time, where the presenter of this spiritual retreat shared a concept called the sword of truth. And the idea is simply, when you walk through life, you want to hold a symbolic sword of truth in your hand. And the quicker you can, as soon as you identify distractions, as soon as you identify something that's not part of your truest path, you slice it. You use that sword, and the faster you can slice, the more you're going to stay focused on what's true, what you're really here to do. And so I remember thinking, well, okay, I'm going to try bringing the sword of truth concept into the breathwork session. And so I did, and it was an amazing session. I mean, I was so committed to not being distracted. It's kind of an interesting concept that, and I was like, okay, so a thought would come up. Oh my God, I'm just moving in some really wild ways right now. My physical body is moving. I wonder what I look like. I wonder what my two friends are thinking. And I was like, oh, distraction, slice it, stay back and just forget about that and just stay present with what's happening. Or then I'd start thinking, oh, I meant to say something to that other friend. Oh, distractions. So I carried that sort of truth all the way through that session, and it was really profound, one of the deeper sessions in my memory. So that's something you can bring in, is this idea of the sword of truth. This is the last slide. Some other actual suggestions. If you're feeling stuck, you're just having a hard time getting out of the head, the first thing you can do is try changing up the breathing. Some say breathing into the upper chest. I've heard some people tell me this is kind of a new thing for me, but I'm open and curious. I've had two people tell me recently that breathing into the upper chest, okay, you always need to breathe into the lower belly, but some people, if you really want to take it a little deeper, you can add an extra little puff into the upper chest, like, and by doing that, those two people have said that they open to a more emotional state in the breathwork. So that's something you might consider trying. Or, if you've been doing it through your mouth all the time and you're feeling stuck, try breathing in the nose and out the mouth, or try breathing just in the nose. Try slowing down your pace a little bit, or try speeding up a little bit. Okay, so visualizations. One of my theories is, if you have an ornery mind that has a hard time letting go, one of the best things you can do is give it something else to do. If you're totally immersed in the breathing and you're keeping up and you're still in the head, and then you're totally surrendering to the music and just letting the music take you on a journey, and you're still in your head. Early on in my sessions, I had some experiences where one experience, I saw an aperture on a camera in my breathwork session in my mind's eye, and I just, something in me said, oh, that I know that's the gateway to my unconscious. It's not a weave, it's an aperture, which is like the thing when you take a picture on a camera, it opens up and then closes. And I just instinctually thought, you know what, I need to start imagining that I'm opening the aperture. So it was not a verbal thing, it was a visualization. And so whenever I would breathe out, I would imagine that that aperture was opening wider. So that, doing that over the course of that session, like I could almost feel myself being possessed by my unconscious in deep ways when I use that technique. Another session I had, saw myself on a surfboard, lying on a surfboard with my arms out and my palms up. And I was on the ocean. In every out breath, I was imagining that the surfboard was blowing deeper out to the deep ocean. And I was getting farther and farther away from everything, all civilization, all people. And I could feel myself going deeper. And then at some point, the ocean turned into a whirlpool, opened up, and it started sucking me down. And that was another really powerful session. So open yourself to the possibility that visualizations might come in, or you might try the ones I just shared and see if they work, or what else might come up for you. It's just, it gives the mind a third thing to focus on that makes it harder to be in your thinking mind. Another thing you can do is bring the body into the breath. I know somebody who uses their arms every time they breathe. And they've been breathing for over 10 years. They just instinctually, they'll push their arms up with each breath. And it's like, when I'm watching it, I feel like it's almost like they're pushing away their thoughts with their heads. But somehow that makes it easier for them to go into a trance state. I know that when I breathe, I kind of breathe a full body breath, where when I'm breathing, my legs, my feet, my feet, I almost feel like I'm breathing out my feet. And a lot of times, like my legs will start to move as I'm breathing. And there is something about bringing the body in, trance in the body. There's some trance dance, like 5 rhythms and ecstatic dance, where it's all about getting into the body. Let your body become part of the breath. That's another thing to try. And then always, if you've never been experienced allowing yourself to move in breath work or to vocalize, well, movement, open your heart to that. It's, you don't want to force it, but you really, if there's the slightest bit of like you're tapping, when you're in the car and a song comes on, you might find yourself tapping to the music, or your foot tapping. You're not thinking about it. If there's the slightest bit of movement, or explore that, and when the music is higher energy and tribal, because movement really, bringing the body in, really helps you get in more deeply and more quickly. Same thing as Michael always talks about, vocalizing. I'm going to save this. I've recently purchased a neurofeedback device, which has been giving me a lot of insight into the thinking mind and how powerful it is. And in a nutshell, it's really validating for me how quickly and easily we no matter, we might be meditating, we might be in the breath work, we might get into a deep state, but then when our mind kicks in, it's just like there's a spike in our brainwaves that brings us back to the thinking mind way quicker than I ever imagined. And it's really kind of enlightening. I'm going to write a blog post at some point, but if we have more time after questions, I can tell you more about it. But I just wanted to share that there's neurofeedback and tracking brainwaves. It really validates for me that if you have a strong thinking mind in day-to-day life, it's going to come up in your breathwork session too. All right, so that is the presentation, and I'm going to flip it off right now and come back. And basically, I'm here pretty much for as long as you guys want to ask questions, within moderation. But so I'm going to kind of do what we do in our regular workshops, which is kind of start with a chat. But if anybody would like, oh wait, I'm going to stop the recording here too. So stop.